Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Geeks and Barbells where we talk about geeky shit. I wanted to discuss something that is near and dear to my little soul, my little heart. There's not much left of it, honestly. As you get older, your heart just slowly kind of shrinks until it's cold, black, and empty. Yeah, but luckily I'm still kind of weird, so everybody, kind of gets past it. So, anime. That's what I want to talk about. Anime. Specifically, as we are thinking about it in the English language, anime has to do with Japanese animation. And I wanted to talk about how these days, as anime is really expanding, because it really is, ever since websites like Crunchyroll, Funimation, obviously the expansion of tube sites like GoGo Anime and Kiss Anime, which are more legal, but even things like Netflix suddenly having a much wider catalog of anime, Amazon Prime. I'm not sure what's happening in the other streaming services, but so anime is really starting to push and get out there. Super exciting to me hearing about how Studio Ghibli finally gave the rights for streaming to Netflix, although that's only in Asia, unfortunately. I believe HBO Plus is supposed to be getting it, or already has it here in North America, which I'm kind of bummed out at. It would have been more logical for Netflix to get it since more people have Netflix at this point, but there seemed to have been a problem between Ghibli and Netflix over here. Kind of sucks. And Disney, of course, lost that opportunity a long time ago because they were the original distributors of Ghibli's work across the world, mostly. But they screwed up a little bit too much, meddling around with Miyazaki's work, and he was like, screw you, don't touch my shit anymore. So that's it. But long story short, anime is really starting to push out, and over the last 5 years, 6 years, you've really started to see it become more mainstream. Which, I mean, it's always been pretty popular, but here in North America, the only things we really saw were, let's say, Dragon Ball, Pokemon, stuff like that, which kind of made the jump over to our sphere. But they were much more what I would consider cartoonish in nature, in the sense that they were much more relegated to children. I mean, Dragon Ball Z was maybe more violent, but you don't really see much of anything in it. They weren't really getting into deep, darker themes, which quite a few anime do, especially they get into quite complex issues. And then, of course, there's normal anime, slice of life and whatnot. If you're into those kinds of things, they really didn't make it into our sphere. Unless you want to consider like Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura slice of life, which I loved Cardcaptor Sakura. I loved that show when I was younger, and I think I rewatched it a couple years ago, and I still loved it. So yeah, Japanese anime, unfortunately, is still suffering, I think, and will continue to suffer as it attempts to make it into our market, and that's because of two things that I wanted to discuss. The first, this has to do with the Japanese. They simply, in many cases, Ghibli is a perfect example, don't want to allow their stuff to come into our market because the Japanese are very, very strict in a certain sense of how they view things and how they want to control their product, which is, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it does stop them from transferring over distribution rights and all sorts of things into the North American market. It does block that. That's a small thing. The main issue, the main thing that does stop the popularity of Japanese anime from reaching more of a wider audience is simply the fact that the Japanese are so different in terms of the way they view philosophy and especially humor. And for many people, myself included, who I've been watching anime since I was a little kid, and I still find it extremely difficult to watch many kinds of anime because part of this is translation issues, because even the best kind of Japanese to English translation, some concepts just they don't translate well into our language. They just simply don't. And when you're talking about something like philosophy or general ideas and whatnot, the Japanese can really go down some rabbit holes that actually don't lead anywhere. And when people are watching shows, especially even the most serious, like brutal, violent kind of shows, they still want to have some kind of understanding of where does the show want to go? What's the direction? And many anime go off the rails, and they go into philosophical territory that actually serves no purpose, doesn't help the story in any sense, is actually very confusing many times. Again, this partly is because of translation issues, but the Japanese like to just kind of, you can say, explore ideas without them actually going anywhere. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that, let's face it, for most people who are getting attracted into that kind of sphere, especially younger people, they're not looking for that kind of stuff, and it is utterly confusing for a younger person to try to understand what the hell's happening. Which then leads to the second problem in Japanese anime, and that is because of this issue of trying to reach a wider audience and not being able to, because of those kind of translation issues, we'll call them, the differences in culture, the Japanese have kind of fallen back on two kinds of things, which is their humor and also ecchi. For anyone who doesn't know what ecchi is, let's just simplify it and call it sexuality for no reason whatsoever. Now, I'm actually someone who gets really annoyed at the ecchi in most Japanese anime. I have nothing wrong with there being sexuality in a show, but I've seen Japanese anime that will go the entire season with huge amounts of innuendo, weird touching, and like not even like anything happening, just boobs and ass and all sorts. It's very focused on just like ridiculous scenarios of men being utterly awkward, making no sense, women throwing themselves at men, and the men like constantly awkwardly stopping them and never actually developing anything. You can go through an entire anime and practically see like a girl naked, and the guy will still not have kissed her in a relationship. And so there's a lot of weird sexual stuff in terms of the way we view things in North America, Europe, and whatnot. And so these actions simply don't make sense. The Japanese do it because in Japanese culture, it is very, I mean, I don't even want to say only Japanese culture. I've lived in Asia for quite a few months at a time. You know, I think in total I've spent probably over a year in different parts of Asia. I've been to Japan for 3 months, and many Asian cultures are very compartmentalized in their view of sexuality. It's like they won't even hold hands in public. It's like a huge thing, but yet at the same time you're walking down the street and they're selling porn like right there at a kiosk in front of everybody. It is very you know, there's a dichotomy going on in many Asian cultures that's just very separate. It's contradictory, and they haven't figured it out yet. And you see that a lot in Japan. I mean, look at hentai. Hentai is tentacle porn and like extremes of sexuality, and yet in Japanese culture it's very like controlled. So that dichotomy, unfortunately, when it's pulled into an animated show that is drawing a much younger audience, ends up being that they just throw a bunch of boobs and ass and things into scenarios that it doesn't matter how serious an anime is, it doesn't matter how serious the theme is, all of a sudden there'll be weird sexual stuff or just sexual innuendo that does not suit the moment at all, and takes away from it from anyone who's there for the story. Even for anime that I watch, let's say purely from an action standpoint or just to enjoy, like, we'll say it, the violence, there's still weird ecchi and stuff that makes no sense. It's kind of like, what's a good example? A good example would be the anime High School, is it High School D&D or High School, I can't even remember at this moment. It's a zombie anime, which actually had some really nice animation. There was some pretty wicked combat scenes inside of it, and there was a good story hidden behind all the stupid ecchi that was in there and the humor that didn't suit. And it's because they're trying to just draw people in by using the ecchi. And unfortunately, they lose out on the possibility of an actual good story and an actual serious setting, even when the animation is good. And you're seeing that more and more and more in the anime scene, where it's just whatever stories or the possibility of a good story that gets destroyed, pretty good animation, and then it's just horribly ruined by just 90% of the focus is on some like awkward harem stuff and just boobs and ass. And again, I have no problem with there even being sex in an anime, so long as it actually makes sense and is gonna happen. Like, you build a relationship between two people, they're attracted to each other, they kiss, they have sex. Okay, like a normal normal thing. Instead, animes just throw tons of half nudity and suggestions and innuendo, and nothing ever develops. It never goes anywhere, and it's just pointless and distracts you from an actual story. That drives me crazy. And the same thing unfortunately happens with humor. Now, Japanese humor again is very, very different than North American humor. It is very childish most of the time. It's more in the realm of what I would consider to be stupid humor, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it's just like doing weird, dorky stuff, and I'm a weird, dorky person. I love doing stupid shit, just being fucking awkward and strange. So in general, I would enjoy that stuff, and there's moments where I do, if it makes sense in the moment. And unfortunately, when you compare Japanese culture to North American culture in terms of timing and setting of humor, it is very different. Very, very different, and it turns a lot of people off. I've seen people I really respect on YouTube talk about this stuff, how they get turned off. And I'll give a good example. I've watched the original Full Metal Alchemist, and I've watched Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood a few times, and I've recently restarted watching it specifically because I want to do a review on it, talk about it, make a few videos on it, and I want to just make sure it's all refreshed in my head. And within the first 2 episodes, there was humor there that was repeated over and over and over again. I saw one of my favorite YouTubers, Daniel Green, talk about how it just didn't make any sense in the moment that they were repeating this joke. They were talking about how short one of the brothers is, and it's true. And I saw this. I'm going to be preparing a review of Demon Slayer, which is one of my favorite anime, incredibly great, and it's like 9 on 10. And the reason it's not a 10 on 10 is because in many instances the humor makes no sense. And it's not to say always, but there's moments where they're in a setting, they're in a moment where them being childish or stupid or acting dorky is funny, or it's just amusing. It breaks a smile on my face, and it's acceptable. But there's many other instances in which Demon Slayer follows a very, very serious theme. I mean, it's demons and family and bloody violence and death everywhere, and people are terrified of their mind. And all of a sudden, there's humor in there, but it's not dark humor. It's not sarcasm. It's not wit. It's not the kind of humor that breaks out of you when you're scared in a moment, so you're trying to make yourself feel better. It's dumb humor, and it does not fit the moment and completely pulls you out of what's happening in the moment. And that happens a lot in anime. And unfortunately, most anime does not have the phenomenal story, graphics, everything that Demon Slayer has. Most anime completely ends up relying on that and ecchi, and it's not worth watching after. Or it just gets to a point where you don't even know where the story is going anymore because of this ecchi, because of this humor that is just, they've turned something that could be serious or could be beautiful or just could be really interesting into a joke. I remember watching an anime once called Taboo Tattoo, I think it was called Tattoo Taboo in English. And when it first started, I thought it was really cool. There was some great fighting. The animation was very, very fluid. It seemed to be building up some really cool system of magic and the power. And then one of the fights was going on, and it is a super serious setting. People have died, and all of a sudden, it turned sexual in the middle of the fight. I can't remember the exact scene, but like the guy was fighting the girl, and then all of a sudden he was like grabbing, he like grabbed her, and then all of a sudden was like fondling her boobs. And it's not like, oh, I'm gonna rape you. It's he was just fondling her tits, and she was making moaning noises, and it just like, you're looking at it like, what the fuck is happening? They completely did this for what we call ecchi. They did this, so let's face it, it's for guys. It's for young guys to watch and go, oh, boobies. And I'm like, ugh, this completely ruined the moment. And this happens a lot in Japanese anime. Now, again, this is Japanese anime. They can do this stuff however they want. They're trying to draw clients in. They're basically trying to attract younger audiences who go boobs, and that's it, because the market for anime has been small for so long, and that was a way for smaller studios, newer things, to draw clients in. But now that Netflix and Amazon Prime and Funimation and Crunchyroll are starting to really get big, we have the opportunity to have much better quality anime that does not rely on ecchi or strange humor to try to draw in clients. Those things can be in there, but they can make more sense. And I think we're slowly starting to see that. I mean, I've seen over the last year or 2 years, there's been lots of dumb anime, but more and more and more I'm seeing good quality anime coming out that is not relying on those things. They might pop in a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm super happy about the fact that it's just slowly getting reduced. You're starting to see less and less of this trope of the dumb, loud protagonist who has lots of women throwing themselves at him for no particular reason, and he's completely oblivious or uninterested, or is interested but for some reason never pursues it. You just see that kind of harem mentality constantly in anime. And again, there's lots of that shit still coming out, but more and more I've seen some phenomenal series that even when they have them in them, they don't fall into the same tropes, like Demon Slayer. The Demon Slayer has almost nothing ecchi in it. I can't even think of one single instance of ecchi. If I'm thinking about it, I'll check it out when I do my review. Full Metal Alchemist was great for that. In that sense, I will say I won't even say there's ecchi in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I mean, there's women who are sexy, let's say, within the context of a scenario, but it's never over-sexualized or weird or awkward or anything like that. There's just actually a sweet childhood relationship that kind of builds up over the course of 60 episodes, and even at the end is almost barely touched on. So Full Metal Alchemist is phenomenal for that. It's more so their bad timing humor that can kind of throw people off. But yeah, I just think that for many people, and this is kind of a shout out to everyone who's hesitant about anime. Give it a shot. Be very picky. If you start watching an anime and you're like, this is super awkward, the humor or the sexuality, don't take that as like all anime are like that. They're not. You have to push through. And there's some anime that does have those things, but if you just nudge yourself through those moments, you'll get to a point where it's almost eliminated completely. Demon Slayer is a perfect example. There's moments of weird humor that might turn people off, but it's okay. Just push through it. 99% of the anime is phenomenal. Same thing for Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Trying to think of an anime that has a shit ton of ecchi or a little bit of ecchi, but that is worth pushing through. I'm blanking right now, so we'll leave that one to the side. But give it a shot, people, and be aware that more and more anime are changing. They are becoming much more serious, and as Western culture kind of gets into Japan more and more year by year, we're seeing much less of that stuff within their anime because they realize that it just doesn't make sense to us, so they're kind of pulling away from that. Again, there's nothing, not to say that there's anything wrong with how the Japanese do things, because I mean, it's their anime. They can do it however they want. I'm someone who very much is hoping, and I think you're going to see that more and more now that things like Netflix and whatnot have this stuff. You're going to start seeing North American studios doing their own version of animation. And I've talked about this before, where I think we have this huge swath of material in fantasy books and science fiction books that could be made into anime that would be phenomenal. Phenomenal. Much better than any like live action TV show or movie could ever do, because it's just much easier for an animated film or show to showcase the magic systems and all the complexity that goes into many of these books. And I'd love to see more North American studios, European studios who do their own version of anime, but basically aren't going to turn off people with the vast difference in culture that unfortunately happens with Japanese anime. I really do think that we need to have this expansion, because many anime have inspired games, and I think there's so many possible games that could be made if we started having North American studios who create really cool animated films and shows, and then they get transported into the gaming sphere. I mean, it all ties in together. The more creative people get, the more they open up their minds to these kinds of things, the more opportunities we're going to have in all the different domains of art, we'll call it, or geeky art. And yeah, I'm just crossing my fingers. So if you are watching this and you've tried anime, but you've kind of, been turned off by the ecchi or the humor, give it a moment, push through it, try other anime. There's a lot of really phenomenal anime that do not get bogged down in that Japanese philosophy or humor or ecchi, or sometimes they have it, but they're just done much better, and they don't affect the story in the same way that others do. So yeah, give it a shot. Tell me what you think. Comment below. And like, subscribe. Check out the website, geeksnbarbells.com. Check out my other work. And if you disagree or think I'm being unfair to the Japanese culture, let me know. I really want to go back to Japan. Phenomenal place, especially Kyoto. So cool, so cool. I love the Japanese. I think they're probably some of the most awesome people out there. And I'd love to actually start learning the Japanese language so I can not have to deal with the English subtitles and their weird translation issues sometimes. Yeah. So have fun, everybody. Talk to you soon.